Hey everybody, welcome here to our off-season at lunch special episode this week. Just talking about coaching carousel today, so wanted to get an episode out to you guys this week, but obviously due to the Christmas holidays and everything, we're doing some changed times this week. So I don't know if you guys saw, but Biscuits and SEC did last night on Monday. Here's some of our other ones. Usually I'll pre-record go Tuesday morning. We are not doing our SEC after dark this Thursday as usual. That will instead be next Tuesday, the day before the first playoff game. So scheduling note, next week, Tuesday, the 30th will be our SEC After Dark episode. You can catch Jake doing his double dose of Tide Talk and Bama After Dark, and Corey will be doing his Locked On Vandy this week. Steve doing lots of Locked On Ole Miss stuff. And as I said, Biscuits and SEC did their normal Wednesday episode Monday last night. And you can catch the pre-recording or the recording of that on YouTube. It was a fantastic episode, so I recommend you seeing that. But here, we're not talking about playoffs. We're not going to talk about the transfer portal as much, not talking about bowl games. We are focused on the coaching carousel, which is one of my favorite things to talk about. What I do, a lot of writing about for Mike Farrell Sports. And this has been a unique coaching carousel situation. We had more openings earlier in the season than we usually do, which then correlated with more hirings earlier in the season than we usually do. Oddly enough, for this time of year, only 2.5 weeks after the regular season, we typically would have 10, maybe a dozen openings now, and we would be early in the period of hiring guys, interviews, waiting for assistant coaches still in the mix and head coaches to interview, finish their bowl games, playoff. That's not happening. We only have 2 current head coach openings in all of FBS. Michigan, which I will talk about a lot in a little bit, and the other opening we have is Ohio. John Hauser will be their interim head coach for the bowl game. He's been the D coordinator there for a couple of years, going back to Tim Albin. That, of course, is after the Brian Smith firing, who was in his first year, took them to 8 wins, but will not be the coach moving forward there for a number of indiscretions, which I won't get into too much here. But in terms of that Ohio job, John Hauser, as I said, was the D coordinator there, has been at Ohio for the last 3 or 4 years, was at Miami with Chuck Martin before that. I think Hauser is a strong candidate to get that Ohio job long-term. He's done a good job as D coordinator there. Ohio's kind of like Toledo and Miami in that conference too, where they're kind of recession-proof. We've had a lot of success there across multiple head coaches. So I think if I was a betting man right now, John Hauser would be the guy who I would pick to retain that Ohio job and get the interim taken off. If that doesn't happen, they'll certainly have a lot of good candidates. Going back to the Tim Albin years, he had multiple good seasons there. And of course, he was there with Solich before, but Scott Ishfording is their offensive coordinator at Ohio. He could be another guy that's in the mix there. With the success they've had, I don't think they go outside of the Ohio family. Spencer Nowinski will be another possible candidate there. He was the D coordinator for Jason Eck at New Mexico this year, had a history at Ohio and Miami with those guys. So Nowinski could be another guy to look for there. But moving on from Ohio, we've seen a lot of movement lately, and I'll kind of give you my thoughts on the ones that have taken place in the last month or so. I'm not going to go back to the in-season ones as much, but starting off in December is what I'll go back to. So this one was technically the last day of November, but Will Stein is the one I'm going to go back to. Going Lane Kiffin and before that's the delineation there. We had a live episode a while back with Jake and Bossman. We talked about the Kiffin stuff, but Will Stein was hired by Kentucky, his home state. He previously was the O coordinator and still is through the playoff run at Oregon. He's a heck of a coach. Played at Louisville, so the rivalry, interestingly enough, before Oregon, he was the O coordinator for Jeff Traylor at UTSA, where they had their best seasons, since Traylor's been there. So Stein was a guy who was a Lake Travis high school in Austin, coaching there, went to UTSA and worked his way up to Oregon, was hired by Dan Lanning, and now will be an SEC head coach. So been a quick rise for him. And I think that was a good hire for Kentucky. The Mark Stoops era, they should build a statue for Mark Stoops outside of Kroger Field. He's the best coach they've ever had. They were a poverty program before he got there. He elevated them to respectability. I think the way he was treated the last couple of years was inappropriate. He deserved better from their fans and the people that tried to run him out. That being said, they had went stale, and even the best of coaches, if you don't leave on your own, it's the old saying, either die a hero or live to see yourself turn into the villain. That kind of turned into Mark Stoops there. He'll coach again somewhere, I have no doubt, but I don't think it's terrible that a new era is starting there, as much as I disliked how things ended at Kentucky there. We'll talk about the other Oregon coordinator. So Will Stein was Oregon's O coordinator. Tosh Lupoy is their D coordinator, and he will be the head coach at the University of California. So his alma mater, the Golden Bears, hired him. He was longtime Nick Saban assistant at Bama, spent multiple years in the NFL across Cleveland, Atlanta, Jacksonville, I believe, and then has been at Oregon since Dan Lanning got the job there. And Lupoy, from day one, he was kind of considered the front runner, the main guy who they probably wanted. He's also made some good moves in assistant coaches so far this season. So he has retained Nick Rolovich as who will be now the quarterbacks coach. Rolovich is the interim head coach at Cal and will be through the bowl game. But Rollo's going to be retained there. He was a good head coach. I'm kind of surprised the G5 team didn't scoop him up as a head coach. We're not clear if Brian Harsin is going to be retained as O coordinator. I think there's a chance it happens. He had a good year there. And you guys know a lot of my feelings on Harsin. Very good coach. Auburn was just a bad fit for him. And they were jerks. I mean, they literally manufactured scandals to try to fire him from day one. So I think Cal would be a decent spot if they keep Harsin. And then Cal's new defensive coordinator, I'm blanking on the guy's name, but he's the safeties coach for my Minnesota Vikings. So they're getting an NFL guy who will be going to Cal for that defensive coordinator job. Michael Hutchings is his name. Yeah, but good coach. He'll younger guy as well. He'll be the new D coordinator. So Cal and Kentucky both hiring the Oregon coordinators and doing good jobs there. The the job that seemingly was open forever and everybody turned down, and it got a lot of people extensions. Penn State has hired since then, and they hired Matt Campbell, of course, from Iowa State. For the disaster that process was, and for what a nightmare Penn State went through, it ended decently well for them. Matt Campbell's a very good coach, a good hire. So surprisingly, that ended better than I expected it would for how they kind of got dragged through the mud and seemed to not know what they were doing. But Matt Campbell going to Penn State, and a good chunk of that Iowa State staff is going with him, as you would expect for a guy who was somewhere for a decade. You're going to want that familiarity. His replacement at Iowa State, they wasted no time. That night, they hired Jimmy Rogers, who had spent 1 year at Washington State, and prior to that was at South Dakota State, where he won a national title and then made it to a national semifinal. So tough for Washington State. You have Jake Dickert there, who goes to Wake. Then you hire Jimmy Rogers, who's only there for a year, and then goes to Iowa State. And Washington State, Oregon State, it's looking like they're just going to be stepping stone jobs now with that conference instability. Not a shocker there. But I do think the Jimmy Rogers hire was a good one for Iowa State. He's a solid coach. Also around this time frame, we had Kansas State. Chris Kleiman has chosen to retire, though it wouldn't shock me if we see him coach again in a year or so. But retired at K-State, was 6-6 this year. Prior to this year, had a good run there, and was at North Dakota State before that, where everybody had won a lot of games, including him, where he was NDSU's head coach for 5 seasons and won 4 national titles. You will not see a more impressive resume than that at the FCS level, or any level for that matter. But former K-State QB and Texas A&M offensive coordinator Colin Klein has been hired as the replacement there. And frankly, I think it was a mistake that Klein stayed with Texas A&M through the playoff. Their offense was anemic, and it reminded me of 25 years ago when Mark Richt got the Georgia job as Florida State's offensive coordinator, and they had a terrible showing in the national title game against Oklahoma. Even the best of intentions can't help you do 2 jobs at this level at once. So I think Klein absolutely wanted to do what's right by Texas A&M, and he wanted to be there for them through the playoffs. You can't do that, I don't think. And it showed. They were terrible on offense. The O-line looked bad. Marcel Reed had some very poor turnovers. So I think that may be a cautionary tale of you can't do 2 jobs at once, which Ryan Day may have learned from, because Brian Hartline, Ohio State's offensive coordinator, has taken the South Florida job. He is coaching with Ohio State in the bowl game playoffs, but Ryan Day has said he will be the play caller in the playoffs. So we're not going to see that there. I think for USF, that Hartline hire was decent. He's been a good Florida recruiter. Recruiting is his massive utility. He's only been the play caller. He was a play caller this year. Last year it was Chip Kelly. The year before that, Hartline was the O coordinator. But I believe Day was the play caller. So he had little experience as a play caller up to this year. But he's been a massive recruiter, has done extremely well with getting those receivers ready for the NFL. And I think for a G5 team at USF, that's a decent hire. Hartline was going to get a shot sooner rather than later, and that was a decent move for them to hire him. An interesting 2-step here. Jim Mora Jr. had a great year at UConn. Heck of a coach. He was in his 4th season there. He had taken over a very poor situation in the wake of Randy Edsall, not having a good tenure there in his second go around. But Mora, through his 4 years there, started off with 6 wins, dipped to 3. Then he had consecutive 9-win seasons the last 2 years. Going to Colorado State, which, not surprised you got a different job. A little surprised it was for another G5 one, even though relative to G5 teams, Colorado State is known to have a good budget. They pay their assistant coaches well in that pool, as evidenced by their previous head coach, Jay Norvell, was taken from a conference foe who had been at Nevada before. So there's some proof in the pudding there. Great hire for Colorado State. UConn turns around, hires Jason Candle, who had been the long time, since 2016, he'd been Toledo's head coach, won 81 games there, went to a bowl game every year but one, and even that year, every year but one, other than the COVID year, when they had a winning record. The COVID year didn't go to a bowl game. He was 6-6 one year, and they didn't get a bowl bid. Every other year they went to one. 53-25 in the conference there, which in looking at MAC teams, I think the conference record is more indicative because those conference teams love to be sacrificial lambs for paychecks in their non-con games and play bigger schools. You show me a MAC coach with a good conference record, I will show you a good head coach. Candle, Chuck Martin, etc. So good hire for UConn, tough loss for Toledo, who then turned around, and Toledo has hired Mike Jacobs, successful FCS coach at Mercer. He was only there for 2 years, but in those 2 years, they won 20 games and made the playoffs both years. Before that, he was a successful D2 head coach at Lenore-Rhine. So Mike Jacobs, a defensive guy, will be the new head coach at Toledo. Now we'll look at James Madison and the fantastic year they had. Lou, you had Kurt Signetti there. You were fantastic. You came up from FCS under him. Then you hire Bob Chesney, who had been at Holy Cross. He's only there for 2 years, takes you to the playoff. Of course, won 9 games and then 12 this year, won the Sun Belt. Chesney takes the job at UCLA, which odd fit to me. I think he's a heck of a coach, but going all the way to the other coast when he's only ever coached on the East Coast, that's a tough move. And UCLA is a tough place to win. You're not well supported. Your stadium is the furthest off campus of any in the country. They did get good news in that Nico is coming back to UCLA for all the fodder he was last year. Nico played quite well under Jerry Neuheisel once Deshaun Foster was let go. And Tim Skipper, they did a good job with Nico. So keeping him was good. Chesney's a heck of a coach. I'm not sure I like the fit of him going to UCLA. JMU turns around and hires Billy Napier. Obviously, we talked about him a lot in our group show, and I've written about him at Florida. He ended up being a game below 500 in 4 years there. But before that, he was 40-12 at Louisiana with the Ragin' Cajuns, 3 times won the West. And in his last year, they won the Sun Belt title game. So 4 years of Florida didn't work out there. They weren't terrible. They did not meet expectations in any way in his time there. But we know he can win in this. He's called Sun Belt Billy derisively by a lot of people. Maybe that's going to work, though. I think for JMU, that's a great hire. And with the resources and the current success JMU is having, you're set up to win. And I really like that hire of Billy to be Chesney's replacement there. Another Sun Belt guy, Charles Huff. Boy, has it been a whirlwind of the last 13 months. He's going to be on his 3rd job in 13 months. So we won the conference with Marshall and had the notorious disagreements with the athletic director. Former athletic director now, I should say. And I'm in the minority amongst the Marshall people. I put most of that blame on Spears, the former AD. I think when you have a coach who's in a conference title race who ends up winning it, you make sure you get a deal done, you give him the extension, and you play nice. The former AD didn't do that, and I think Huff may have been looking for a reason anyway. But Charles Huff is a heck of a coach. He won the conference with Marshall. He goes to Southern Miss where they were 1-11, and this year they go to a bowl game. I mean, you go from 1 win to 7. That is a significant and fantastic jump. Very few teams anywhere are going to be able to do that at the G5 level. Huff was then turned around and hired by Memphis, who we had talked our last episode about Ryan Silverfield going to Arkansas, a hire which I did not like. But Huff was going to Memphis in a hire which I do like. He's a solid coach at this level, and the proof is in the pudding. You can't debate that. Ryan Beard was at Missouri State, and in their first year in the FBS, they won 7 games and went to a bowl game. They lost their bowl game to Arkansas State since then, but Missouri State finished 7-6. Nick Petrino was their interim coach in the bowl game, son of Bobby, who Ryan Beard leaving Missouri State for Coastal Carolina. Petrino has since followed him after being the interim head coach in the bowl game. So Ryan Beard did a good job at Missouri State. He was there with Petrino as a D coordinator, then as head coach for 3 years, won 8 games last year, 7 this year, which I said was their first year in Conference USA in the FBS. He will be going to Coastal Carolina as the head coach there. So good move for the Chants in getting a proven head coach at this level. We had the biggest name or biggest school we've had open since the Michigan one, Utah. Now, it wasn't really open. Kyle Whittingham retired or resigned, whatever you want to call it, after over 21 years there. He was the longest tenured FBS head coach. And Morgan Scally, their longtime defensive coordinator, has been an assistant at Utah since 2007, D coordinator since 2016. We knew he was the head coach in waiting, was swiftly promoted to head coach. So that job was never really open. It was a seamless transition. And in the case of Utah, I don't hate it. You could have gotten a bigger name. That's a good job now, one of the better ones out there. But Scally's earned what he's gotten. He's a Utah guy, and I like that hire. Now, Whittingham, initially was framed as a retirement. We'll get to that in a little bit because he has said some interesting things at a press conference or an interview within the last couple days. Washington State, I talked about Jimmy Rogers leaving there. They turned around and hired Kirby Moore, who had been Eli Drinkwitz's offensive coordinator at Mizzou for the last couple of years, where they ran the ball well, had good success under several different groups of players. So that was a decent hire for Wazoo. And I think if they do well with Moore, he'll get a different job. You're not going to, that's not going to be a career destination anymore, if it ever was. But if Kirby wins, he's probably going to be jumping somewhere else. Now we're going to circle back to Utah. Oh, Missouri State, one more. In Ryan Beard leaving for Coastal Carolina, the most recent hire in FBS. This happened the 19th, a couple days ago. Casey Woods, offensive coordinator at SMU, was hired by Missouri State as the head coach. Another Missouri assistant who had been a tight ends coach at Mizzou, has been the O coordinator at SMU since 2022. Longtime Lashley guy. Woods is hired at Missouri State. I think for them, that's a very good coach. They went to the playoffs last year, obviously, with SMU. Kevin Jennings has done well. He's done good coaching RJ Maryland. And before that, Grant Calcaterra at tight end at SMU. So got to like what he's doing there. Good move. Circling back to Utah now, we're done with the recap and the recent moves here. If you see on the right, we're under the Power Four now. So I'm going to talk about Kyle Whittingham. Can't say enough about what he did at Utah. He was the head coach there since Urban Meyer left Utah for Florida back in, I believe it was 2004. Long time. But we all kind of thought Whittingham had retired. It was framed that way. Then he comes out in a press conference a couple days ago or interview and says, basically, I'm not done coaching. I still would like to coach if the opportunity was right. I just wanted to make sure and leave before the job got stale, before I, wore out my welcome and they got sick of me, which I found kind of silly for a guy who wins every year and has been there for 20 years. That wasn't going to happen, I don't think. Or if it was going to happen, it would have by now. But it tells me Whittingham is open to the idea of coaching again. And boy, would he be a good hire for someone. You talk about a guy who has had good programs. They've played fundamental football, been good on offense and defense, good in the trenches. He's adapted well to the portal. They're not having off the field problems, staying under the radar in that sense. He's a guy that we're almost never hearing bad press, but I can't remember ever hearing, bad words about him. So Kyle Whittingham potentially being out there, which brings us to Michigan, the premier opening right now. As I said, Michigan and Ohio are the two openings. We're going to talk a lot about the Wolverines, though. Excuse me. Sharon Moore obviously fired, where you've heard all about the scandal and stuff going on there, which was fireable, but they also wanted to get rid of him because they weren't happy of him. So they were more or less sitting on that and waiting to give him the axe when they chose to. But Michigan is a massive opening. They haven't been great. We're still only 2 seasons away from them winning the national title, though. I mean, this is an elite job in college football, the winningest program of all time. The timing isn't great for them, but it is a great job. We're hearing multiple coaches mentioned. I think there's 3 that are legit contenders, but some of the guys were, hearing for the odds. Kalen DeBoer, who I don't think is going to leave Alabama for the job. Jed Fish is a former Michigan guy. He did well at Washington this year. He was very good at Arizona before. Jed Fish will get a bigger job in the coming years. I think a blue blood job. He's an elite coach. I don't think it's going to be the Michigan job this year, though. Eli Drinkwitz, again, we've heard mentioned for a lot of these bigger openings. I'm a big fan. Any school will be lucky to have him. I don't think he's going to be the guy here for this job. Brian Kelly, out of work. Similar to what I said about Brian Harsin before, he's a very good coach who was not a fit for the recent job he was at, LSU in his case. But he still won a lot of games there and was awesome at Notre Dame, awesome at Cincinnati, been a good coach at every level he's been at. Kenny Dillingham is still listed on the odds here. And, in some places, if you're putting some coin on it, you can get betting odds on Dillingham. He more or less said he's out now. So I don't think Kenny Dillingham is going to be the Michigan guy. The 3 people that I think are the actual contenders right now are the aforementioned Kyle Whittingham. He's second in the odds right now. The leader in the clubhouse odds-wise at the moment is Jeff Brom at Louisville, who you guys know, another guy I've been a big fan of. He took Purdue to a conference title game recently in 2022. won 9 games and then 8 games and won the division there at Purdue. We've seen how fast they've fallen off at Purdue. Purdue's a tough place to win. In the last 60 years, him and Joe Tiller are the only guys they've had there that have had net winning records. That's how difficult of a place it is to win at. He'd won at Western Kentucky, won 30 games in 3 years, then went to Purdue, had the 9 and 8 win seasons and won a division. The last 3 years he's been at his alma mater. He has won 27 games in 3 years, had a 10 win and 9 win, and now they were 8 in the regular season. This year they have the Boca Raton Bowl coming up against the aforementioned Toledo. That game will be tonight, actually. So tune into that one. But Jeff Brom is a really good coach. He's a good offensive play caller. They've used the portal extremely well. He knows how to construct a roster. Typically says the right things. I think he's a guy that you can get behind. I am baffled that some of the Michigan fans are trashing him as a candidate in the media right now. Their heads are in the clouds. Like, who do you think you're going to get that's better than him at this point? Not that Michigan's a fantastic job. It is one of the better ones it's probably a top 10 opening. But he's close to that level as a coach now. You are elitist, and I said your inflated opinion of yourself if you think Jeff Brom is too good for you. He is not. Or you are not too good for him, would be the better way to put that. He's a top-notch coach. The third Michigan guy that I think has a legit candidate or is a legit candidate for this job, Biff Poggi. A lot of people might say, well, what the heck? That's an odd one. Biff was at Michigan before, associate head coach under Harbaugh, had been an analyst there previous to that, and had been a long time, very successful head coach in the Washington, D.C. area at a few private schools there. He was Charlotte's head coach for 2 years, 23 and 24. He was the Charlotte 49ers head coach. That didn't translate to wins. They won 3 games each of his years there, and it didn't work out well there. Tim Albin's a good coach, and it didn't work out well there for him in his first year this year. Maybe there's deeper problems with that Charlotte program than we know about. But Biff's a candidate. Sometimes the best ability is availability. That might be Biff right now. And I think Biff's a good coach. He's Michigan's interim right now. Currently, the odds for the 3 I talked about, Brom is the leader odds-wise. Then it's Whittingham. Then it's Biff. If I were betting right now, I would bet that Biff gets the job. I don't know if it's permanently or if it is as an interim for next season, but I think Biff will be the guy. Certainly Brom could be. I think they both have a better chance than Whittingham. I think they're the only 3 viable candidates right now, but Biff's there. Biff has good relationships with Ellison and the boosters. He being there this year, I would assume his relationship with Bryce Underwood is decent. You're going to want to keep him. He's familiar with the place. And if we know anything about that Michigan crew, they love patting themselves on the back. They love elevating themselves. They love the idea of a Michigan man. As ridiculous as it may be, it worked out with Harbaugh. That dude had won everywhere and been in the NFL. He was going to win everywhere, anywhere he went. So, but that's not to say that's going to hurt Biff in this search. Whether it be as the interim for 1 year or as a permanent guy, I think Biff will end up being the guy at Michigan, and I don't hate it. You get continuity with him. They were a better team on the field this year than I expected they would be. So that's not to say this season was a disaster for them by any stretch. They did a lot of good things, starting a true freshman quarterback in the Big Ten. They won 9 games and had a 7-2 conference record with a Citrus Bowl against Texas coming up. So You could do worse. But at Michigan, I think Biff is going to be the guy. If he's not, if they hire Jeff Brom, Louisville becomes a very interesting opening. And it was one I was mulling over some ideas about this with a friend last night. I don't know what direction Louisville goes in. Ty Helton in-state at Western Kentucky could make some sense. J.G. Kinney, if they want an offensive guy, even though Texas State wasn't great, Kinney may be a guy that you want to go after, because a lot of the Louisville obvious candidates for them are those AAC and Sunbelt guys that already got jobs. Your John Sumralls, your Eric Morris's, Charles Huff, Alex Golish. Those are the types of guys Louisville would have wanted to hire. All those guys have jobs now, so you can't, you're not going to hire them. Maybe Jamie Chadwell, even though they had a poor year at Liberty this year, maybe Chadwell could be a Liberty guy. I don't know about that. If that Louisville job comes open, I will certainly do a deep dive into that and get a candidate list out there. So that would be the opening that would happen if Louisville, not a huge carousel there, but you never know. Now we're at the case of Marcus Freeman, which is an interesting one to talk about. We are hearing the New York Giants have significant interest in Marcus Freeman, and why wouldn't you? He is a young, successful head coach who is charismatic, who has been at Notre Dame for multiple years and has done a heck of a job. They played, obviously, in the national title game last year. This year, missed the playoffs. They got salty, decided to not play in their bowl game, which was maybe they should have made the playoffs. Not saying they shouldn't have. The way they handled it was childish and juvenile. I will say that. But in Freeman's time at Notre Dame, lost the bowl game in his first year. He won, and that was his only game. He just coached the bowl game that year after Kelly left. He's since won 9 games, 10 games, 14 games, and 10 games this year. It's a 43-12 record across 4+ seasons. That's very good. And honestly, if I'm Marcus Freeman, I probably take the NFL job. I love college more than anybody. I love college more than the NFL. But if you're Marcus Freeman, there's no downside to you going to the NFL. If you go to the Giants and you're terrible for 2 years or 3 years and you get fired, you bounce back and immediately are a candidate for the best blue blood, top-notch college jobs that are out there. You will be able to seamlessly transition back to any or among the best college jobs available. So if you're Freeman, you have any itch to scratch in terms of coaching in the NFL, this is the time to do it, I think. But for me, in my writing about coaching carousel and that, Notre Dame becomes a fascinating opening in the carousel. Even though none of these jobs were open at the same time, LSU, pretty much everybody said, was the top available job this carousel. And then we had debates on, well, what was next? Was it Florida? Was it Auburn? Was it Penn State? And so on. I think I would argue it was probably Florida, but Notre Dame pips all of them. Notre Dame becomes, with LSU, the best available job. You could make an argument for either one, Notre Dame or LSU, being the best available job. You can't tell me they're not the two best, though, in this cycle if Notre Dame comes open. And who the Irish would potentially hire is a fascinating talk. I think if I'm Notre Dame, the first guy I would call would be Mike Elko, former D coordinator for the Irish, doing very successful at Texas A&M. Now, the hiccup there will be A&M will pay whatever it takes to keep Mike Elko, as they should. He's done great there. He did well at Duke. But if I'm Notre Dame, maybe Elko says no. Maybe he wants to stay at A&M, wants to be in the SEC, likes what he's building. More power to him if he wants to do that. I wouldn't take anything away from if he decides to stay at Notre Dame, or excuse me, decides to forego Notre Dame and stay at A&M. We have another former Notre Dame D coordinator succeeding in the SEC that will also be a potential candidate here. Clark Lea at Vanderbilt. Lee was ho-hum his first couple years at Vandy. The first 3, they weren't great. The last 2, they have lit the world on fire. Since he hired Jerry Kill to come with him and they got Diego Pavia, Vandy's been a top-notch team. They've exceeded all of our expectations. Clark Lea would be another guy, I think. I don't think they talked to him before Elko, but I think Clark Lea gets a call, and that would be the hiccup with Elko was the money A&M would offer. The hiccup for Clark Lea would be he's a Vanderbilt alumni. Notre Dame's is certainly a bigger job, more prestigious. Maybe he just wants to stay in his hometown of Nashville and coach where he went to school. We're also hearing, they're working on an extension at Vandy. I don't know that he's already signed one, but we're hearing it's going to happen. I think those would be the top 2 Notre Dame candidates, though. Another one, similar to the Biff Poggi one we were talking about at Michigan, where a seasoned veteran who's been there for a long time in, multiple iterations, you could make Biff the interim there. Notre Dame has one of those, and his name is Mike Denbrock, offensive coordinator at Notre Dame, has been there. I believe this is his 3rd time. He was at Notre Dame as an assistant coach, went to Washington, came back to Notre Dame for multiple years under Kelly, went to Cincinnati, then was at LSU with Kelly, now is back at Notre Dame. So we've seen Mike Denbrock around a lot. He's in his 60s. He would not be a long-term guy, I don't think. But if you want a guy, if you don't want to risk a expensive long-term splash and you want a continuity, stable candidate, Mike Denbrock could be a very good short-term guy at Notre Dame in the interim. Al Golden left Notre Dame after last year to go back to the NFL, D coordinator for the Bengals. Maybe you want to give Al Golden a shot. I'm sure he would be interested in the job if he could. He was head coach at Miami about a decade ago. He was very good at Temple when he was there, went to Miami, wasn't as great, but also wasn't terrible. So Golden, could be another guy on the hook there. Tommy Rees, former Notre Dame offensive coordinator, was a Nick Saban guy with Bama, left Notre Dame to go to Alabama as the O coordinator. But Rees is now the offensive coordinator for the Cleveland Browns this year, where they're not having a great year. I don't keep up nearly as much on the NFL coaching carousel for assistants. I don't know if Rees is in danger of losing his job or not, but Tommy Rees could be a Notre Dame candidate, especially this time of year when a lot of the suitable, desirable candidates have already left. But if Marcus Freeman does leave, I think one of those guys probably gets it. Like I said, if I was Notre Dame, Mike Elko's the first call I'm making, which say in this universe, Mike Elko says yes. Well, then we have a Texas A&M opening, which is interesting because we talked about before, their offensive coordinator, Colin Klein, has already taken the job at his alma mater, Kansas State. So who would Texas A&M then go after I got a name for you. Lincoln Riley could be a Texas A&M candidate if Mike Elko would take the job at Notre Dame. Elijah Robinson had been the interim head coach there after Jimbo got fired, spent the last few years at Syracuse with Fran Brown. He's coming back to A&M now as D-line coach, maybe associate head coach, something else on his title. I don't know that he's a permanent fix for that job, but A&M will want a proven head coach at the P4 level. I think Lincoln Riley could be an option there for them. The aforementioned Jed Fish may also be a potential A&M candidate, but they will have no shortage of good candidates. I don't know if Joey McGuire would leave Texas Tech for A&M, considering the financial backing the Red Raiders have, but it is a move to be explored. Another grizzled veteran, older guy that knows Texas well, Willie Fritz at Houston, had a heck of a year. He could potentially be an A&M target if Mike Elko would leave, but we're putting the cart before the horse there, and I will certainly get into all of it if Louisville becomes open, if A&M becomes open, if Notre Dame becomes open, any of these, I will certainly write an article on them, which you will be able to find on my X Twitter account below. You can see my handle at HughesmanCFB there, and we'll talk about it on these shows. But I want to thank you for listening. Hold on, I'm gonna check and see if there are any. I didn't see any messages or questions asked before, but I want to double check in case any of you have asked. Nope. Don't see any, so that's fine. Again, I want to thank you. I hope all of you have a Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays. Again, looking at our group stuff, the one I want to circle down here, the SEC After Dark. We're not doing our usual episode this Thursday night. That will be next Tuesday, the 30th, so that we can talk about all of the quarterfinal playoff games before they happen. But thank you. Merry Christmas. Have a fantastic rest of the day.